It may be the best performance we'll ever see from a pitcher in a 3-month span, but I would say it's the most impactful trade deadline acquisition a team has made. CC Sabathia ended up 5th in Cy Young voting and 6th in MVP voting from his 3 months in Milwaukee. Sabathia took the underdog Brewers to an unlikely playoff push, breaking a 26-year playoff drought. He may have only been a Brewer for 3 months, but he cemented himself as a Brewers legend. Let's set the stage. It's June 2008. Just last season, Cleveland lost Game 7 in the ALCS to the eventual World Series champions, the Boston Red Sox. During the offseason, Cleveland and Sabathia were unable to come to an agreement on an extension. This lack of a deal left CC frustrated with the organization, as he was planning on playing his whole career in Cleveland, and at the end of the 2008 season, CC was set to hit free agency. Cleveland was going to try for one more push with Sabathia, but they ended June last in the AL Central after a sub-500 April, May, and June. It was clear that a fire sale was starting as soon as possible in Cleveland, starting with their biggest asset, Sabathia. CC had a rough start to the season with a 4.72 ERA to end May, but was still considered the best trade piece at the upcoming trade deadline. The Brewers were a 500 ball club entering June, but managed to go 16-10 in June, propelling them back into the NL Central and wildcard races. Brewers GM Doug Melvin knew that they needed an ace to round out the pitching staff to keep the Brewers' playoffs hopes alive. Their best pitcher was no doubt Ben Sheets, who had pitched to a 2.03 ERA in April and had just a 2.77 ERA before the trade. They lost their young pitcher, Giovanni Gallardo, after tearing his ACL in just his 4th start of the season. Dave Bush and Jeff Supan were both pitching around a 5 ERA, and they brought in Seth McClung in an emergency to start. But that wasn't going to work for a playoff push. Their team was clearly dependent on their offense, which was led by right fielder Ryan Braun and first baseman Prince Fielder. It was just the Brewers' luck that a Cy Young Award winner was going to be available at the trade deadline. Melvin reached out to Cleveland's GM, Mark Shapiro, at the beginning of June and told him, "I'd be willing to give up more talent if I could get Sabathia earlier in the trade deadline process." They continued to talk throughout June, and it became clear the Dodgers were the Brewers' biggest competition for Sabathia. A deal almost went through that would have sent Sabathia to the Dodgers, but the deal wasn't approved by Dodgers ownership because they didn't want a rental. There were rumblings about CC ending up in Milwaukee, and he got a call before the trade became official from one of his friends and relief pitcher for the Brewers, Dave Risky, that he was coming to Milwaukee because he saw Sabathia's jersey being made in the back. And on July 7th, they came to an agreement. The Brewers sent first baseman Matt Laporta, the Brewers' top prospect, lefty Zach Jackson, righty Rob Bryson, and a player to be named later for Sabathia. The haul of young talent didn't really pan out for Cleveland, but the player to be named later was dependent on the outcome of the Brewers' season. Shapiro and Cleveland couldn't decide which player they preferred between third baseman Taylor Green or outfielder Michael Brantley. So, they came to an agreement. If the Brewers made it to the playoffs, Shapiro would decide who the player to be named later was, and if they didn't, Melvin would. And in the end, Shapiro chose Michael Brantley, who became an all-star while in Cleveland. Now, back to CC. He was dealing with a flood of emotions after being traded from the team he was drafted by and thought he was going to play for his whole career. But that quickly changed once he landed in Milwaukee.
We're here today to announce the acquisition of CC Sabathia.
CC Mania has officially begun, and it has Milwaukee buzzing with an anticipation that this city hasn't seen in recent memory. Brewer fans are bubbling with excitement, and tonight they will get their first look at last year's AL Cy Young Award winner and this year's prized acquisition. Today, CC Sabathia starts his tenure with the Brewers. The future is now, Milwaukee. Let the chase begin.
Sabathia was given the option to report after the All-Star break, but chose to report to the Brewers immediately. And on July 8th, just one day after the trade, CC was on the mound in Miller Park, making his first start for the Brewers, wearing his Cleveland cleats and all. He went 6 innings, allowed 3 runs, 2 earned, striking out 5, and walking 5 against the Rockies. Clearly, nothing spectacular, but a sellout crowd loved it. In his second start for the Brewers, Sabathia faced division rivals, the Reds. He pitched a complete game, allowing 2 runs, walking 1, and striking out 9. He also went 1 for 3 at the plate, hitting a home run off starting pitcher Homer Bailey. His next time on the bump was in San Francisco, where he pitched another complete game, with 1 earned run, punching out 10. Next, in St. Louis, CC again went the distance, but this time he pitched a shutout with 7 punchies. His 4 dominant starts ignited Milwaukee, and ticket prices began to soar. The Brewers went 10-9 in July with Sabathia. It was also a perfect fit for Sabathia in the clubhouse. There are a bunch of guys he was already friends with, like Dave Risky, Prince Fielder, Mike Cameron, and Ricky Weeks. He felt like he'd always been on the Brewers. The team would only do better in August, going 20-7. CC was on the bump 6 times, and the Brewers won all 6 games. He pitched to a 1.12 ERA in the month of August, pitching at least 6 innings. He threw a complete game against the Nationals on the 8th, and then again against the Astros on the 18th. On the last game of the month for the Brewers, CC pitched another complete game against the Pirates, pitching 117 pitches, giving only 1 hit up to Andy LaRoche in the 5th inning, which seemed like it was an error by CC on a routine play, but it was ruled by the official scorer as a hit. I guess that's what you get when you're the away team. The Brewers entered September with an 80-56 record, 4.5 games behind the Cubs in the division, but leading the wild card race with the Phillies 5.5 games behind them. Then disaster struck the Brewers in the first half of September. They went 3-11. They started the month off by being swept by the Mets. Then they split a series with the Padres, lost a 4-game series 3-1 against the Reds. Then they were swept by the Phillies. They needed to keep pace, and CC was coming back down to earth after a spectacular August, and it was clear that if CC was winning, the Brewers were winning, and vice versa. The Brewers were looking to end a playoff drought of 26 years, and this sent the front office spiraling. The last 3 weeks of the season, every game was like a playoff game. Front office fired Ned Yost with just 12 games left in the season, hoping to light a fire under the team. They appointed the third base coach, Dale Swayam, as interim manager. The older players, like future Brewers manager Craig Counsell, helped keep the team together. It was the end of the season, and the pitching staff was getting depleted. On Swayam's first day as manager, CC went into his office and told Swayam that he didn't need to worry about who was pitching tomorrow because CC was pitching tomorrow. And CC stepped up and started pitching every 3 days, making 4 starts in the team's last 12 games. He was still unable to stop the Brewers' losing ways in his start on the 20th. He pitched 5 2/3 innings, giving up 4 runs, 1 earned, striking out 3 against the Reds, leaving the Brewers 2.5 games behind the Mets. It looked like the Brewers were choking at the end. Sabathia's agent was upset with the Brewers front office for pushing CC too much in a free agent year, but it wasn't the team, it was CC, who was pushing to pitch on 3 days rest for the last 12 games of the season. He was willing to do anything he could to help the Brewers win, even in a free agent year. His second game on 3 days rest, CC pitched 7 innings, giving up 1 earned run and striking out 11. Entering the last game of the season, the Brewers were tied with the Mets for the wild card spot. CC was taking the mound against the Cubs. He came into the game confident. He knew he was going to win the game. He pitched a complete game against the Cubs, allowing 4 hits and striking out 11. Ryan Braun hit the go-ahead 2-run home run in the 8th. The Brewers couldn't totally celebrate yet, though. They had guaranteed themselves at least a tie-break game with the Mets. The Mets and Marlins game was still not over. So, Brewers fans anxiously watched in the stadium, and the Brewers watched in the clubhouse. And 34 minutes later, the Mets finally lost to the Marlins 4-2, and Miller Park erupted with joy, ending a 26-year playoff drought. The Brewers' playoff appearance was brief, as they lost in the NLDS to the eventual World Series champions, the Philadelphia Phillies, in 5 games. CC pitched in only 1 game, pitching 3 2/3 innings, but his dominant performance in Milwaukee was clear. He ended the season leading in complete games and inning pitched, and was second in strikeouts. he managed to end up top 6 in both Cy Young and MVP voting, despite only pitching half a season in the National League. The Brewers' magical run to the playoffs was carried by CC, their newly acquired ace. In Milwaukee, Sabathia made 17 starts, going 11-2. He had pitched 7 complete games, 3 of them being shutouts, with a 1.65 ERA. He had an ERA plus of 255 and a B-WAR of 4.9. The Brewers did try to bring Sabathia back on a long-term deal, and Sabathia expressed interest in staying with the team. But in the end, the Brewers' budget would not match other offers. CC rejected the Brewers' 5-year, $100 million offer and signed the largest contract for a pitcher at the time with the Yankees. The Brewers and Sabathia both benefited from the 3 months in Milwaukee. The Brewers finally set up a winning culture that would bring them back to the playoffs many times since. Sabathia was able to pitch for a team truly going for it in his contract year. As we all know, CC was a big competitor and fed off that energy. And Sabathia's brief tenure in Milwaukee will always be remembered by Brewers and baseball fans alike. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please subscribe. Thank you.